Okay, so this is topic 9. We're looking at policies and standards. So some of the stuff we're going to be covering here is, security management considerations and responsibilities. Kind of who, how are, what is a security policy? Kind of what the role of the chief information security officer is, and the idea of what needs to be done in terms of awareness, security awareness, and training goals and topics. All right. Um, there's a document here, special publication NIST 850, building a security awareness and training program, which really gives us a pretty good is a good framework for what the steps you would need to do and what should be contained in a security awareness program. All right, so there's a couple of things to be considered when we're looking at information security management. The things we're looking at and the things we want to think about. All right, so from the starting point, we want to be aware of the sensitivity of the information. So the idea is, you know, not everything is equal. Not all data is equal. So obviously, some things are more sensitive than others. So the stuff that would be considered more critical should be treated in a different fashion than stuff that's less critical. It seems, important to, it seems common sense, but a lot of times, a lot of organizations, a lot of folks in organizations will try to do the term we like to use is boil the ocean. We're going to treat everything exactly the same and spend as much energy on one piece as we do for everything else. All right, so the idea of understanding the sensitivity of the information and kind of is related to that is this idea of balancing security and costs. The idea is all of this stuff to implement security, there's a cost associated with it. You don't get it for free. And the idea is and the other thing to be aware of, most organizations have limited assets. But the focus really needs to be, you prioritize, you identify and prioritize certain areas. And the same thing is true in security. You want to prioritize the things that are important and put less emphasis in the things that might not have as much value. Right? So the idea of trying to establish a plan and establish a balance. And then also the third thing really we want, another thing we want to keep in mind is the idea of keeping the organizational business objectives in mind as we're developing the security management um, plan. I mean, the organization in and of itself is not necessarily the goal of the organization is not necessarily to run security. However, it's important to have security in order for the organization to run successfully. So, prioritizing it, understanding what the importance is, and then balancing it against, the overall broader organizational objectives is important. Um, Understanding the organization's risk tolerance. Some organizations are more risk tolerant than others. So the idea would be that if organizations is risk tolerant and understands that okay, if we don't you know make every investment in security, so we understand what the implications are, but they're willing to accept that risk. Other organizations are not. So a lot of this stuff is an organization specific um, circumstance. So stronger information security if is really should be desired if management is averse to risk, versus and each organization makes its own decision, based upon its own requirements. And and finally, this idea that stuff changes. So changing risks and needs. You want to be proactive in making decisions and planning. Also, want to make sure that um, things will change. Just because you've established a plan and a program and you've put things in place, the assumption cannot be that this will always stay in place. It's not a fixed uh, it's not a fixed point in time. It is there. It changes and can change in all sorts of ways. So the idea of being able to monitor and adapt on an ongoing basis becomes very important. So some of the responsibilities falls into this. So within the security organization, you need to assess risks and needs. Those are the folks who are going to be involved with their job is to advise management around things like what are the risks, what are the and across all sorts of things in terms of technological vulnerabilities, change in laws, monitoring, new technologies, vulnerabilities of, things we change as we go through. So this is an ongoing thing. The idea related to that monitoring, you know, understand what your current level of risk profile is, understanding what new profiles are, how is this stuff changing on an ongoing basis. The implementation of the policies and controls, in response to this. Eventually, for every one of these risks that we evaluate is important, we're going to establish policies around dealing with this. Are these being effective? Are the controls that we're putting in place truly effective? And then also awareness, making sure that everybody in the organization is aware of the implications and the risks associated with this, and being able to, implement this stuff on an effective basis. So there's really two levels we look at this. When we see things, from a security governance perspective, we look at from a strategic level, it's really the high level stuff. What is organization goals and objectives, and how does security align with that? The tactical plans are more, specific day to day, the actual tasks, the actual things we're doing to achieve what we've identified in the strategic goals. Each one has its own level of importance. Obviously, strategic is maybe broader in scope, focus more on a broader number of issues, whereas tactical tends to be more detailed and focused, and maybe more practically oriented. So security policies, the idea of foundation of information security program, the unified business practices. What are we doing, and making sure we're doing it and doing it consistently. The way we implement this stuff, the way we implement security is through, establishing and supporting standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines. So those are the kind of the different tools we work with. Also defining, what are the roles, responsibilities, who's responsible for this for particular areas, and what are the activities that need to be taken care of. Plus also the issue around establishing and communicating throughout the organization. What are the policies? Kind of a training exercise. Part of the responsibilities of the security organization is to, basically define the policies and to make sure people are aware of the policies, and through communication. Organizational policies. Once again, there's organizational policies that are aligned with, that take into effect, the security. So security does not exist in its own, necessarily in its own isolated world. It ties into organizational policies, it ties into functional policies, and it also ties into, system specific policies. So there are, so organization functional, are not exclusively security, but there's a security dimension that have to be called out. Systems specific is going to be more technical, around either technical or operational areas. But obviously, that's this kind of the security associated with those domains. The standards specify technologies or approaches used in control risks. It's really the hardware and software requirements. It is as they are translated into the broader requirements. The name of the game here: consistency. You want to be consistent in your implementation and interoperability. You don't want to have some things with very, very precise, detailed, low level kinds of things, measured up against very kind of high level visionary. You want to establish a consistency across the board. With the objective is to increase efficiency and improve security. One of the challenges of security has always been seen as an overhead item that reduces efficiency and is kind of a running cost that you should be avoided if at all possible. So the idea is you want to be able to implement security, establish an environment, and ideally you'd like to do it in as efficient, inobtrusive a fashion as possible. So the CISO, or the Information Security Officer, ISO, number of different responsibilities: communicating information security risk to management. They are that he or she is the person who is responsible for doing this, ensuring regulatory compliance and assisting auditors, developing a program of the security awareness program, policies, procedures, baselines, standards, and guidelines that we had talked about. This is how security gets implemented. Um, Identification, monitoring of emerging threats and new technologies. How do what's happening? How are things changing? Where's our next potential threat coming from? And then finally, responsibility for evaluating security incidents and responses. Sorry. Um, so a lot of things can be done with this. Say job and job controls, being able to define within an organization how people should be assigned from job to job, or kind of separations of duties. A principle of least privilege. So basically, you only get the minimum number of privileges that are required for somebody to do their job. So there's a number of different things that kind of falls into play with this. The training goals, first and foremost, communicate expectations. What are what are we trying to do, and what are the expectations? Providing guidance, how to perform this stuff. It's not necessarily a precise, list of, you need to do tasks A, B, and C, but at a minimum, it really needs to be this idea of providing guidance and being, and ensuring compliance. A lot of times the challenge is trying to find, depending upon the type of employee, the type of focus that needs to be, and the type of communication that needs to come into play for particular types of employees. Some different topics, things that need people that have applicability across the organization. So, business continuity, disaster recovery. Everybody in the organization will play some role within a business continuity plan. Understanding what those roles are and kind of what their level of engagement needs to be. Depending upon the type of organization, the management of hazardous materials, regulatory compliance requirements, organizational security policies. These are all things that kind of make up these different types of topics. Some of the broader, appropriate computing use, personnel security and safety, information handling, and proper care and credentials of proper care and handling of security credentials, which are broader, has a broader scope. Everybody will have some sort of engagement with that. So information security duties, some of the stuff that, we see, some of the stuff is technical in nature. So like the monitoring, the management, setting up, operation of firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems. Depending upon, say, more from the operational side of things, this firewalls and intrusion detection is more network security. Operational security is going to be something along the lines of backup and recovery, which is really one of the fundamental building blocks of your business continuity recovery plans. And also things like antivirus and anti-spyware programs. And there are others, and it's not limited to just those four. Some of the ethics programs, organizational ethics programs, basically kind of defining from kind of the different elements that need to be incorporated, computer ethics, but the organization should adhere to. Some of the core ideas around this stuff, there's no secret systems for recording and maintaining data. Individual privacy should be upheld. No unauthorized user access to resources. Computers must not be used to harm, steal information, or carry unethical activities, and do not use anything. Should not be doing anything causing waste of time, resources, and capability. Some of these are, have different impacts, or implemented in different ways, to be able to maintain and sustain core, your ethical standards. And that is everything we need to know about security management.